Imagine this. You are only 14, standing bare in a freezing stone chamber, while unfamiliar women's hands inspect the most hidden parts of you. The Duchess of Bedford observes with sharp intent as two midwives handle you like livestock brought to market. The trembling in your body does not come from the February chill creeping through the walls of Rouen Castle, but from dread. These women hold your entire destiny within their aged hands. A single verdict from them, one claim that your purity is gone, and everything you know collapses. You are no ordinary girl. You are Blanche of Navarre, a queen-to-be, and this test will decide if you live with honor or fall in disgrace. Before uncovering these buried tales of endurance and misery, if history's hidden corners fascinate you, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more, and share in the comments where you are tuning in from. I am always amazed that we can revisit such distant stories together, joined across centuries and lands by the same hunger to know the past. The year was 1453. After more than a decade bound to Henry IV of Castile, Blanche endured an official inspection that declared her untouched. 13 years of lying beside a husband who never claimed her, 13 years of a union that mocked her, 13 years of whispers about whether fault lay with him or her. Now 29, she would be stripped by strangers to confirm what her body had carried in silence. Yet Blanche was far from alone. In the hidden corridors of medieval politics, every woman who bore a crown or sought one lived the same nightmare. Their bodies were never truly their own. They were possessions to be measured, judged, and certified by those sworn to guard them. Medieval Europe revolved around lineage and blood. Chastity was prized above all, for it served as the surest proof of a child's father. In a world where succession meant survival, where a single heir could shift dynasties, a woman's purity became a sacred guarantee. The only certain way to ensure an heir's legitimacy was to take a bride who had never been touched. The examinations took many shapes, each more intrusive and degrading than the last. The simplest method to confirm a woman's purity was to check the so-called seal of chastity. Yet medieval superstition and desperation invented stranger and far more humiliating practices. Take the sieve ordeal, a procedure so ridiculous it might sound comic if it were not cruel. A popular test involved giving a maiden a sieve to see whether, in her innocent hands, it could hold water. If the liquid leaked through, the failure was compared to weakness of the body, marking her as tainted. Women were forced to stand before crowds of male onlookers, straining to keep water from dripping through the kitchen tool, their entire honor depending on the outcome. Even stranger were the urine trials. Medieval healers insisted they could judge chastity by inspecting a woman's fluids, just as modern doctors examine blood samples. A 13th-century manuscript even claimed the urine of untouched women was clear and bright, sometimes pale, sometimes sparkling. One authority advised watching the act itself, saying a maiden relieves herself with a faint hiss and takes longer than a young boy. Imagine the disgrace. Noble daughters of kings and queens compelled to perform in front of physicians who claimed they could hear innocence in the sound of water striking a pot. The humiliation was systematic, deliberate, and accepted as normal. Some trials bordered on magic. A 14th-century author, John of Treviso, described a magnet test to reveal whether a wife was faithful. Placed beneath the pillow of a chaste woman, it would cause her to embrace her husband. But if she was untrue, it was said she would leap from the bed in fear of visions. Most dreadful of all were fumigation ordeals. Niccolò Fercucci, a 15th-century Italian doctor, wrote that if a woman were covered with a cloth and smoked with coal, a true maiden would not sense the odor through her mouth or nose. Women were literally treated like meat over smoke while examiners studied their reactions to choking fumes. Those who carried out these procedures were often midwives, women who should have been allies in pain, yet many became instruments of control. Some, out of compassion, would swear a woman intact when she was not, but most were truthful, and their testimony only pushed their sisters deeper under the crushing weight of medieval judgment. Why did women so often turn against their own? The explanation lies in the crushing weight of medieval life. The hand of control that pressed down on women was so vast, so constant, so deeply rooted in custom, that many accepted the rhetoric branding females as sinful, unreliable, lesser, and deceitful. The price of failure was immense. To fail a chastity trial meant more than shame. It could mean death. In certain regions, inability to prove innocence led to execution before a crowd. Elsewhere, it meant banishment, abandonment, or being left to survive as a pauper. For queens and princesses, the fallout was not only personal but political. A monarch's questioned honor could ignite conflicts, topple treaties, or dissolve fragile alliances. Catherine of Aragon's struggle shows how these ordeals became weapons in the arena of power. When Henry VIII pursued annulment of their union in the 1520s, Catherine swore until her last breath that she entered his bed untouched, never having shared her body with Arthur, Henry's elder brother. For years, this proud daughter of Spain endured her most private life dissected by clerics, lawyers, and politicians who cared nothing for her dignity, only for advantage. Henry needed proof Catherine had been joined with Arthur to claim their marriage opposed divine law, a task far harder than he imagined. As Catherine stood firm that she had come to Henry pure, the same body once inspected and approved for one marriage was now doubted and challenged for another. The very process was a form of ritual torment. Noble women were stripped bare and set upon tables like specimens awaiting judgment. Crowds of witnesses observed as midwives or doctors examined them, hunting for any trace of intimacy. That delicate veil, so easily torn by horse riding, heavy work, or countless innocent acts, became the cruel measure of a woman's value. Some women were born without it, others lost it to the labor of daily life in those times. Yet such facts held no sway over medieval minds obsessed with female chastity. A missing or damaged veil was taken as proof of corruption, whatever the truth. The ordeal of Joan of Arc shows how this fixation on testing purity stretched far beyond marriage politics, reaching into the realm of divine authority. An inquiry into Joan's purity was carried out sometime before January 13, 1431, under the supervision of the Duchess of Bedford. The first stage was to check her chastity, for it was believed that untouched women were less likely to fall under the devil's influence. Even while Joan was accused of heresy that would bring her to execution, even as she endured months of endless questioning meant to crush her faith, she still faced the same humiliating procedure every prominent woman was forced to undergo. Her state of purity was tested not once but several times. An initial private inspection by two matrons confirmed it. Afterwards, the Duchess of Bedford and her attendants conducted yet another. The irony was overwhelming. Joan, who declared she received visions from God, who stirred France to triumph against England, who reshaped history through her command in war, was reduced to lying unclothed upon a table while noble women searched her body for proof of her holiness. Her bravery in battle meant less to her judges than the condition of a fragile membrane. Her accusers understood the influence of these rituals. She was later sent to Tours for another inspection by women under the direction of Charles's mother-in-law, Yolande of Aragon, who again confirmed her purity. This was meant to prove that she might indeed be the foretold Virgin Savior of France, to highlight her devotion, and to show she had not joined with dark powers. Such records were preserved for decades, even centuries, making sure that the shame of one inspection would echo far into history. The trial of Joan of Arc contains detailed notes of her chastity examinations, written by men who saw no conflict between calling her a servant of God and using her body as courtroom evidence. Her judges surely knew by rumor that at Boiroy, the castle of Jean de Luxembourg, who sold her to the English, his aunt, wife, and daughter all respected Joan and pleaded with him not to betray her. Yet even admirers of her bravery saw nothing wrong with subjecting her unclothed body to inspection. The religious reasoning for these ordeals was especially distorted. Medieval Christianity declared the body to be a temple of the spirit, yet treated women's bodies as crime scenes to be examined. The same church that preached human dignity repeatedly violated that dignity in the name of moral purity. Joan later explained that her belief in salvation rested on keeping her oath to God, to preserve her chastity of both body and soul. Even Joan recognized that her spiritual standing was tied to her physical state, that her visions of saints and angels meant nothing if her seal of purity was damaged. The trials also displayed the vast medical ignorance of the time. Physicians claiming knowledge in judging chastity often lacked even a basic grasp of female anatomy. They mistook natural differences in tissue for signs of misconduct. They read ordinary biological functions as proof of corruption. Some ordeals were so foolish they seemed comic, except for the real suffering they inflicted. The claim that maidens could hold water in sieves, that their urine shone differently, that they reacted to magnets in certain ways, would be laughable if not for the countless ruined lives. Still, women found ways to resist and trick the system. Accounts tell how some avoided failure in the sieve test by coating it with lanolin. They shared advice on faking bloodstains, on tightening their muscles, on arranging their cycles to align with examinations. These small acts of defiance demanded remarkable bravery. Women discovered cheating during chastity trials suffered penalties far harsher than those who merely failed. They were charged with lies, fraud, and upsetting the natural order. Still, they helped one another, building hidden circles of knowledge and solidarity that lived outside official authority. The financial consequences of these trials were enormous. Royal marriages carried vast dowries, territorial transfers, and trade deals worth great fortunes. A failed chastity test could cancel contracts valued far beyond what most common people saw in many lifetimes. Women's seals of purity became the base of international trade. At marriage, Catherine was about 23 and Henry around 18. Catherine brought a massive dowry from Spain, including territorial rights and trading benefits that made Henry's father rich beyond measure. When Henry later wished to annul their marriage, Catherine's chastity became a legal and financial battlefield that spread through courts across Europe. These ordeals also functioned as political weapons. Claims of lost purity could destroy rivals to thrones, remove unwanted wives, or excuse violent campaigns. Kings wanting to be rid of their queens suddenly raised concerns over chastity that had never troubled them during years of union. Henry VIII's struggle with Catherine of Aragon shows how these trials turned into tools of world politics. Henry once accepted sworn testimony and even declared he found Catherine untouched, yet later claimed their marriage was void because she had been wed to his brother. The contradiction proves how these ordeals were used selectively, applied when useful and ignored when they blocked political needs. The psychological battle was deliberate and organized. Rulers and nobles knew the threat of an inspection often held more weight than the act itself. Women, aware they might be summoned for trial at any time, lived in unending dread, their choices shaped by fear of sudden invasive judgment. This fear bred a climate of suspicion among noblewomen. They watched their own bodies constantly, looking for signs that could be mistaken during trials. They avoided movements that might harm their seal of chastity, even when such things were vital for health or joy. They lived as captives within their own flesh. The effect on medieval marriage traditions was deep and enduring. The wedding night turned into a performance rather than a private union. Couples faced their first act of intimacy knowing that proof of the woman's chastity would be judged the next day. Her body was treated as a historical object to be analyzed rather than a human life to be honored. The international effects of failed trials were immense. A queen whose chastity was questioned could spark diplomatic crises that shook several kingdoms, cancel trade agreements, dissolve alliances, and even ignite wars based on the results of intimate tests. The collapse of political marriages over chastity disputes produced a chain reaction of instability. Realms that had invested heavily in royal unions saw their agreements reduced to nothing. The economic and political costs of failed tests were counted in countless lives and immeasurable wealth. Some realms introduced rules requiring several examinations by different groups of midwives to guarantee accuracy. Such measures institutionalized the abuse while pretending to guard against deceit. They built bureaucracies of violation that treated women's bodies as resources of the state to be controlled. The instruction of examiners shows how systematic this abuse became. Midwives and doctors received direct training on how to perform chastity trials, what signs to observe, and how to record their conclusions. They were taught to set aside any natural reluctance to intrude upon women's privacy in service of larger political agendas. These training schemes produced professional classes whose careers depended on their readiness to inspect women's bodies. They gained skill in practices that carried no medical worth but great political weight. They turned into specialized tools of oppression while pretending to act in medical and moral service. The strategies of resistance created by medieval women reveal remarkable resilience and intellect. They built informal circles to share advice on surviving these ordeals. They invented methods of deception that demanded detailed understanding of anatomy and chemistry. Some became adept at adjusting the timing of inspections to align with natural processes that could hide signs of intimacy. They learned to regulate their emotions during trials to avoid providing more supposed proof of guilt. They reshaped themselves into performers able to endure humiliating scrutiny with careful planning and extraordinary control. Religious women assigned to some inspections faced impossible conflicts between faith and duty. Nuns and other figures of devotion were chosen to examine noblewomen because their vows of chastity supposedly made them trustworthy judges of purity. These examiners had to reconcile their beliefs in dignity and spiritual worth with their part in systematic violation. Some refused and endured punishment for resistance. Others divided their actions, seeing examinations as sacred duty rather than human encounter. The creation of medical instruments crafted for chastity trials shows the level of technological investment put into these practices. Specialists devised instruments intended to probe women's bodies with greater effect, to measure tissue of chastity with more precision, and to record their findings with greater accuracy. These devices were built with the same care and skill given to other medical tools, yet they offered no genuine medical value. They were weapons disguised as science, tools of control presented as instruments of learning. The financial motives that upheld these practices were vast and persistent. Midwives and physicians who carried out inspections were generously paid for their duties. Court officials who organized the trials gained bonuses and promotions. The entire structure produced monetary rewards for those who joined in systematic abuse. These incentives guaranteed that chastity testing continued even when people recognized its harm. Too many benefited from the practice for moral objections to outweigh the profits. Artistic and literary portrayals of these ordeals show how deeply they shaped medieval culture. Paintings, tapestries, and manuscripts often displayed chastity inspections as normal and necessary parts of noble life. Such works normalized abuse by treating it as a subject of art. The well-known 1579 portrait of Queen Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, shows her holding a sieve, while Caesari Reaper's 1611 woodcut depicts chastity personified, fending off Cupid with one hand while holding a sieve in the other. Even centuries after the cruelest rituals had faded, art continued to glorify the images and ideas that once justified violation of women's bodies. The legal codes that supported such practices left precedents influencing law for generations. Courts established detailed rules for carrying out tests, weighing evidence, and issuing penalties. These frameworks made abuse official while disguising it as justice. Legal writers produced long commentaries on the correct manner of tests, the reliability of various methods, and the proper responses to results. They built entire academic fields upon the violation of women's bodies, while claiming to act in service of law and morality. The psychological strategies used to prepare women for trials were cruel and refined. Court officials invented ways to weaken women's resistance, to persuade them to cooperate with their own violation, and to stop them from objecting to their treatment. These preparations included isolation, threats, promises of favor for obedience, and staged displays of the punishments given to others. All were designed to crush women's spirits before the inspection began. The aftermath procedures for failed tests were just as systematic and just as brutal. Courts established strict procedures for punishing women who failed trials, for handling the political fallout of broken marriages, and for discarding women once they were no longer valuable as political tools. These rules included choices of execution, banishment, prison sentences, and forced entrance into religion. They treated women as expendable assets whose inability to meet purity rules justified any degree of penalty. The international networks that maintained chastity testing show how broad and coordinated these practices were. Royal courts across Europe exchanged information on methods of examination, compared conclusions, and synchronized their actions when tests failed. These systems guaranteed that women could not escape inspection by moving abroad or seeking new protection. The machinery was international in scope and united in purpose, weaving a net of oppression that held women regardless of their status or land. The economic formulas that dictated when trials were required reveal the cold, calculated spirit behind these choices. Officials devised ways of measuring when the political rewards of testing outweighed its costs and dangers. These calculations treated women's suffering as a line item in political balance sheets rather than a moral issue. Human dignity was reduced to figures in government accounts. The technological improvements that refined examination methods show how much intellectual effort was invested in perfecting these abuses. Medical workers designed new ways to detect signs of intimacy, new tools for carrying out deeper examinations, and new systems for preserving records. Such innovations were pursued with the same energy and creativity given to true medical progress. They stand as a huge investment of human thought in maintaining oppression. The training manuals used to instruct examiners show the bureaucratic face of these practices. Detailed guides explained correct procedures, common errors, and approved reactions to varied results. These texts treated violation of women's bodies as a technical ability to be learned rather than a moral evil to be rejected. They created professional standards for abuse while disguising it as lawful medicine. The emotional impact of these ordeals often exceeded the physical pain itself. Women who endured testing described permanent trauma that damaged their trust, their self-image, and their relationships. Many never recovered after being treated as mere objects of inspection. They struggled with intimacy, developed harmful patterns, and lived in constant fear of further scrutiny. The cultural acceptance of these trials ensured resistance was rare and ineffective. Society taught women that tests were essential and justified, that their suffering was secondary to political order, and that refusal was selfish or destructive. This cultural indoctrination was so powerful that many women ended up cooperating in their own violation.